Blind man humiliated by manager, then he reveals he OWNs the company. Before we get into this story, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you enjoy stories like these, make sure to subscribe, as we upload at the same time every day. Marcus Caldwell's first step into the lobby was meant to be quiet. After all, that was his general style. No grand announcements, no entourage, just him and his longtime assistant, Emily, entering a space as if they were regular visitors. But the tension erupted the moment he stepped through those glass doors. The lobby was all polished marble, the distant chatter of phone calls, and the occasional squeak of shoes against the slippery floor. He felt Emily gently tap his shoulder, guiding him around a piece of luggage someone had left by the wall. He could sense the stares from various employees, some of whom were perhaps too busy to care, but others clearly noticed something unusual about him. He could hear the slight hush of voices. "Is he blind?" someone whispered. Another voice, more distant, replied, "Maybe he's delivering something?" He felt the cane in his hand connect lightly with the chair. The cane was a necessity for him, but he also liked the sense of presence it gave, the subtle tap, tap, tap on the floor that reminded everyone he was capable of navigating spaces on his own terms. He was about 5 steps into the lobby when a tall, middle-aged man in a blazer suddenly stormed past, nearly bowling him over. The man muttered, "Watch where you're going," before even registering the fact that Marcus couldn't see. Marcus tensed, but he didn't respond immediately. He just paused, letting the cane hover near the man's shoe. Emily gave the man a quick, pointed glare, and the man, a manager by the look of his ID badge, looked her up and down with casual disdain. "Excuse me," Emily started, her voice firm. "Do you realize?" But the manager cut her off with a hand gesture as though she was a child interrupting an adult. Marcus inhaled slowly. He'd been in countless high-pressure business situations, negotiations worth millions, tense standoffs with corporate sharks, but never had he encountered this particular brand of smug dismissiveness aimed so casually at a disability. It was as though the manager simply couldn't fathom that a blind man might actually be important, or even be there for a serious reason. "Look," the manager said, barely letting Emily speak, "this is a busy place, and if you can't handle walking in a straight line, maybe you should stay at home. We don't want any accidents here." The words hung in the air. Marcus could almost hear the hush of people stopping to listen, eyes flicking from the manager to the man with the cane. Emily's mouth parted slightly in shock. She was used to people underestimating Marcus, but the venom in this comment was extraordinary. Marcus didn't move. His posture was relaxed, his grip on the cane gentle, but there was a clear sense of tension brimming just beneath his surface calm. "I assure you," Marcus said softly, "I can handle more than you think." His voice was cool but not unkind. He wasn't here for dramatics or a fight. If anything, his gentle tone only threw the manager off further. The man seemed almost disappointed that Marcus wasn't cowering or apologizing. He scrutinized Marcus's designer suit, the polished leather shoes, and the discreet earpiece that Emily wore, usually to coordinate schedules and read messages on his behalf. "Seriously," the manager said, shrugging dismissively. "What are you even doing here? We don't give tours to just anyone." His ID badge read, "Tony, floor manager." And though Tony wasn't high on the corporate ladder, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who thought he ran the entire company. Marcus could tell from Tony's tone that he thrived on power plays, on keeping people in their place. If he perceived Marcus as a threat or simply an inconvenience, that was enough for him to lash out. Emily took a step forward, but Marcus placed a hand on her wrist, signaling her to let him speak. Despite having every right to lay down the law, this was, after all, his domain. He wanted to watch Tony's behavior a bit longer, to see how far he would go. "I'm here for a meeting," Marcus said, deciding not to volunteer more information just yet. He'd planned to visit this subsidiary branch of his corporation incognito to understand the day-to-day reality of his own operations. In truth, he sometimes did it to test the culture. If employees knew the owner was dropping by, they'd put on a show. But if they believed they were dealing with a faceless client, or a random individual, he'd see their true colors. Tony rolled his eyes. A meeting? With who? Let me guess, you just want to waltz in, talk to the CEO, and pitch some kind of charity case, right? He snorted derisively. Marcus sensed Emily's fists clench at her sides, but she held herself back. Now employees were gathering at a distance, some behind computer monitors, some pretending to shuffle papers, all watching the encounter unfold. This was the first real red flag of the day, and it was a big one. Marcus didn't waver. He held his cane firmly, feeling the tension in the air as Tony's hostility seemed to grow. Yes, Marcus said, his expression neutral. I do want to see the CEO. It's urgent. There was a wry, barely contained smile on his lips. He could have ended this entire charade in seconds by revealing his identity. Instead, he kept it hidden, wanting to see if Tony would do the right thing, or if the manager would continue down this path of arrogance. Tony barked out a short, sarcastic laugh. Urgent? Maybe you should get an appointment, like everyone else. And maybe, just maybe, learn to walk without expecting people to move mountains for you. We're busy here, Grandpa. The hush in the lobby thickened. A few employees looked mortified. This was beyond rude. One or two even looked like they wanted to speak up but didn't dare challenge Tony. Emily inhaled sharply, ready to say something, but Marcus again signaled her to wait. He could practically feel Tony's ego bristling, rising to the surface in waves. Marcus's grip on his cane tightened, not out of fear, but out of a rare sense of frustration. He'd faced discrimination before, but never so brazen in his own building. Tony had no clue he was addressing the man who could quite literally sign his checks or terminate his employment. Marcus wanted to see how deep Tony would bury himself before the inevitable reveal. And so, with a measured tone, Marcus calmly replied, Well then, I appreciate your concern. But I assure you, I'm quite capable of finding my way around, unless you prefer to help guide me. Tony smirked, crossing his arms. Help you, huh? Maybe if you paid me. I got better things to do than babysit. He paused to look over Marcus's shoulder at Emily. Though maybe your assistant here can keep you from getting hurt, if you even bothered to get someone who knows what they're doing. Emily's cheeks flushed red, and for a moment Marcus could feel the full force of her anger bristling next to him. She'd been with Marcus for years, had navigated him through countless buildings, had read crucial documents to him, handled phone calls, and helped him close multi-million-dollar deals. Having some random, pompous floor manager dismiss her so casually was aggravating, but she bit her tongue because Marcus was still evaluating how to respond. Out of the corner of his ear, he heard a slight commotion, a younger employee in the corner, whispering to a colleague. This isn't good. Should we tell Tony who that is? The colleagues shook their head, looking alarmed, as if they feared immediate retaliation. Another voice murmured, I've seen that guy on the intranet. Isn't he? Then they trailed off, eyes darting nervously to Tony, who was still in full confrontation mode. Marcus took a small, deliberate step forward, cane tapping once on the gleaming floor. He smiled politely in Tony's direction. And your name is Tony, right? Tony the floor manager? He asked, though he already knew the answer from the man's ID. Tony grunted a short confirmation. Well, Marcus said, pausing as if weighing his words. Tony, it's interesting to see how you greet newcomers to the company. I'd love to ask the CEO if this is how employees are usually welcomed, or if you're having an off day. Tony's face twitched, something like annoyance flaring behind his eyes. The CEO doesn't have time for a pointless complaint. You think you can just march in here because you have a disability and demand special treatment? Newsflash, buddy, this is a competitive environment. We don't do pity. Marcus tilted his head as though considering Tony's words carefully. Inside, he felt a pang of disappointment. He'd established a corporate culture that was supposed to be all about respect, innovation, and fair treatment. Clearly, that culture hadn't reached Tony's corner of the business. With measured patience, Marcus said, I'm not looking for pity, Tony. I'm looking for professionalism. Tony gave him a pointed sneer. How about you look for the exit? Emily sucked in a breath, her hand trembling slightly. She was ready to explode, to reveal everything in a thunderous declaration that Tony had just cost himself more than he could imagine. But Marcus stayed poised. He took a moment to breathe, tapping the floor once more with his cane, listening to the hush around them. He realized that nearly everyone in the lobby had gone silent, transfixed by the spectacle. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed to enjoy the impending fallout. Marcus turned his face toward Tony's direction again, voice quiet but firm. "Tony," he said, "I've been in this company for a while now, longer than you'd imagine. And I have a meeting that I will attend. If you'd like to impede me further, that's your choice. But I promise you, the consequences might not be what you expect." Tony took a step forward, clearly not reading between the lines. "Consequences? Is that supposed to scare me? Get out of here before I call security. I don't care who you think you are. I don't care what your assistant says. If you're not out in the next 10 seconds, we'll escort you out. And believe me, they're not going to be gentle." A ripple of shock went through the onlookers. Marcus could sense the moment was teetering on the brink of escalation. Emily's eyes narrowed, and before she could interject, he gently placed a hand on her arm again. He wanted Tony to make this move, to see just how far this man would push his false authority. So Marcus said nothing, simply standing there, his blind gaze directed somewhere around Tony's chest, the cane resting calmly by his side. In the stunned silence that followed, Tony raised a hand, signaling a couple of security guards stationed near the elevators. The guards started walking over, both looking uncertain. They recognized Tony as a manager, but they also recognized Marcus from company-wide newsletters and the occasional memo. The guards exchanged looks that screamed, "This is a bad idea." But Tony shouted, "Don't just stand there. Get this guy out of my sight!" Emily inhaled sharply, stepping protectively in front of Marcus. But Marcus just gave a small shake of his head, as though telling her, "Not yet." The guards reached them, their faces pale. One guard, whose name tag read, "Ben," cleared his throat. "Sir?" Ben addressed Tony with a nervous tremble. "Maybe we should check if he has an appointment." Tony snapped back. "He clearly doesn't. Do your job." Then he jerked a thumb toward Marcus. "Now." A hush fell. Emily's eyes flicked to Marcus. The onlookers, some still crouched behind desks or peering from behind potted plants, watched with bated breath. For a few seconds, no one moved. Tony seemed about to start counting down. And Marcus, calm as ever, lifted his chin, letting the tension coil into something thick and electric, waiting for the precise moment to speak. As soon as Tony's barked orders to the guards began to echo, the entire atmosphere in the lobby felt poised on a knife's edge. Emily could sense that everything would explode in a matter of seconds, but Marcus was still unnaturally calm, which only increased the sense of impending drama. She'd seen him hold rooms of powerful executives in the palm of his hand with that same composure. Now, watching him hold back while Tony dug himself deeper, she almost felt sorry for the manager. Almost. Because she knew the reveal would be brutal, and Tony had more than earned whatever was coming his way. Ben swallowed hard, looking Marcus in the eye. Or rather, looking at Marcus's steady, unseeing gaze. "Sir?" he finally managed. "Can I please see some identification or a visitor's badge?" He was trying to be respectful, possibly hoping to de-escalate the situation before it spiraled. Marcus understood and appreciated the gesture. He reached into his pocket and produced a small ID card. The guards looked at it, and their eyes went wide. Tony noticed their reaction and snatched the card, holding it up to the light. "What is this?" Tony demanded, though it was clear he could read the name. His confusion turned to disbelief. "Marcus Caldwell." "Wait, that's impossible." But the photo, albeit small, was clearly Marcus, and the official company branding on the card was unmistakable. Tony's lips parted in a mixture of shock and denial. He glanced at Marcus, then at the card, and then at the guards, who stood stiff as statues. A couple of employees watching from a distance exchanged triumphant glances, as if to say, "I told you so." Tony let out a forced, dismissive laugh, but it was too late. Marcus could sense the chain of realization sweeping through the onlookers. Someone whispered, "It really is him." Another chimed in, "He's the big boss." The hush was broken by scattered gasps. Tony tried to recover. "I mean, maybe this card is outdated, or—" He trailed off, seeing the official seals and the special coating that only corporate officers carried. Marcus took a step forward, his cane tapping once. "That's right," he said, his voice still controlled, yet now carrying a sharper edge. "Marcus Caldwell. The man you threatened to drag out of his own lobby." Tony stammered. But you're blind?" Marcus finished for him. "And you assume that means I can't possibly be your boss?" The question sliced through the silent lobby. Tony's face paled, and the security guards looked at each other, immediately lowering their eyes, unsure how to proceed. They certainly weren't going to lay a hand on the man who signed their checks. Emily took a small step back, letting Marcus have the floor. She knew what came next would be a reckoning, and Tony deserved every ounce of it. The manager shifted from one foot to the other, glancing around as though looking for someone, anyone, to save him. He saw the other employees. None seemed ready to step in on his behalf. They'd witnessed his cruelty. They knew how he'd singled people out before. Tony's illusions of grandeur were collapsing under the weight of harsh reality. Marcus exhaled a breath he felt he'd been holding for the last few minutes. "I had planned to visit this branch quietly," he explained, the measured edge of his voice carrying through the lobby. "I like to see in my own way, how our company treats people, whether employees or visitors. I wanted to observe the day-to-day dynamics without the fanfare of the owner is coming, quick, clean up your act. But you, Tony, you've given me quite an introduction." The mention of Tony's name again made the manager flinch. He tried to babble an excuse. I had no idea, you were just—" The words came out jumbled, and Marcus's posture remained unyielding. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority in his calm tone said it all. One of the receptionists, a woman who'd been typing busily when Marcus entered, finally stood up. Her name tag read, "Hannah." She approached cautiously. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I'm so sorry for how you've been treated. If we'd known it was you—" Marcus held up a hand to stop her. "It shouldn't matter if it was me or anyone else," he said, turning his face toward her. "Tony's behavior is unacceptable toward any human being, let alone a prospective client, a co-worker, or the owner of the company." He paused, letting those words resonate. "And I assure you, Hannah, that I don't want special treatment. I just expect basic respect." Tony opened his mouth as if to speak, but his words caught in his throat. His face burned with embarrassment. He was still in shock, and perhaps he was trying to scramble for a way out. The meltdown was happening in slow motion for him, while for everyone else, it was instant karma playing out in real time. Marcus turned slightly toward Tony. "You told me to watch where I'm going," he said, repeating Tony's earlier insult. "Well, Tony, I've watched, and I see that you don't belong in a role where you manage people. Not with that attitude." The atmosphere crackled. Some employees were holding their breath, expecting an immediate firing. Others exchanged glances that said, "Finally, he's getting what he deserves." The security guards stood off to the side, relieved that they weren't required to manhandle the boss. Tony managed to sputter a half apology. "Sir, if I'd known, I was just trying to follow policy." "Policy?" Marcus echoed, his tone measured. "Is there a policy about insulting visitors, ignoring their needs, and threatening them with security? Because if there is, I must have missed that memo." Silence. Tony's eyes darted to the guard, to Emily, then back to Marcus. He started to speak, but no words came. Emily could almost see the desperate gears turning in Tony's mind, trying to find some angle to slip through. Instead, he found nothing but a vast emptiness where his arrogance had once reigned. Marcus let the silence linger. He could feel every stare, every hush, and the weight of the moment pressing down on Tony like a lead blanket. He wanted the man to feel the consequences of his actions, to understand that this wasn't just about being rude to the owner. It was about a systemic disrespect that could poison an entire work environment. Eventually, Marcus spoke again, each word carefully chosen. "Tony, I'd like you to stand aside." "Security." He nodded to Ben. "Let this man remain here for now. I have some things to address." Tony blinked, seemingly confused that he wasn't being escorted out instantly. The guards just nodded, stepping back. Emily glanced at Marcus, who gave a slight nod in her direction. She understood the silent cue and pulled out a small device from her bag. It was a Braille note-taker and recorder, something she used to keep track of important points for Marcus. She was ready to document everything that happened next. Meanwhile, a new wave of employees trickled in from the elevators, curious about the commotion. Some recognized Marcus on sight, especially since his face had appeared in corporate newsletters numerous times. They went rigid with shock, seeing him confronted by Tony in such a humiliating manner. Marcus could hear the whispers traveling around the room. "That's Caldwell, the founder. This is bad for Tony." The manager tried once more to salvage his dignity. "Mr. Caldwell," he croaked, "this is a misunderstanding. I didn't realize, if I had known." Marcus almost pitied the man, but only almost. "That is precisely the point," he said, voice low. "We don't show respect because of someone's status. We show respect because they're human. And if you can't operate under that principle, you have no place in this company." The hush deepened, suffocating. Employees stood by, their hearts racing. Tony's eyes darted around for support, but found none. Everyone seemed ready to watch him face the consequences. Marcus took a small step back, inhaling as if preparing for the next stage of this confrontation, and the entire lobby braced itself for the storm that would surely follow. The reality of the situation began to sink into Tony's consciousness like a slowly spreading stain. All his bravado, all his sneering comments, were replaying in his mind, but now they were laced with dread. He stood near the reception desk, shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the entire building pressed down on him. Across from him, Marcus still looked calm, though anyone who truly knew him would sense the smoldering anger beneath that composure. Emily didn't bother hiding her disapproval. Her lips were set in a thin line. Marcus broke the uneasy silence at last. "Tony," he said, pronouncing the man's name with measured calm, "we're going to have a conversation here, in front of everyone, because transparency matters to me. You see, I've heard whispers, reports of mismanagement and disrespect in this branch. I came down here to see it for myself, unannounced." A collective intake of breath shivered through the gathering crowd. Marcus paused to let his words settle. He was aware that every second of silence further tightened the knot in Tony's stomach. In a sense, Tony was already on trial, and every employee in that lobby was both a witness and a jury member. Marcus continued. "And what do I find within moments of entering? A floor manager who mocks a disabled visitor, hurls insults, threatens security, and acts as though his power is absolute." He tilted his head as though he was scanning Tony's reaction. "Is that about right?" Tony swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Sir," he whispered, I didn't know. But what if I hadn't been the owner?" Marcus pressed, voice resonating in the hush. "What if I were just another person, a client, a potential investor? How would that have gone? Would you have humiliated them too, because they couldn't see well enough to step out of your way?" He let the question dangle. Tony's face was ashen, but he couldn't seem to muster more than a stutter of denial. Meanwhile, a few employees began to shift uncomfortably. Some clearly had experienced Tony's bullying. Others appeared to be hearing about it for the first time, but they were appalled nonetheless. Emily scanned the crowd, noting who was leaning forward, who was biting their lip, who was trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. A moment of justice, she thought, was finally unfolding. At last, Tony managed to find his voice. "Sir, please," he said, eyes darting anxiously. I messed up. I realize that. Let me make it right. Let me apologize properly and—" Marcus arched an eyebrow. "And what?" he prompted, letting Tony flounder. "And keep my position," Tony blurted, desperation creeping into his tone. I'll do better, I swear. I can learn, I promise. I'll treat people with respect. He glanced over at Emily, voice quivering. I didn't understand your situation. I didn't think. That's exactly the problem. Marcus cut in. You didn't think. You assumed. And you belittled someone purely because they have a disability that doesn't fit your narrow view of competence. He paused, turning his head slightly, as though scanning the room. And I have to ask myself, how many others have suffered under that same attitude of yours? A murmur swept through the crowd. People who had remained silent before were now feeling emboldened. One woman from accounting finally spoke up. He made a girl in my department cry last week, she said, voice trembling. She was new and made a small error, but he berated her in front of everyone. A young intern, hardly more than 20, chimed in. He threatened to dock my pay if I was even a minute late. Marcus listened to each account. The weight of these revelations was staggering, even though he had anticipated hearing such stories. I see, he said quietly. This isn't an isolated incident. Tony shook his head vigorously. Those people, they misunderstood. It was just discipline. You have to be tough, or they won't respect you. His voice cracked, betraying the lie even as he spoke it. Respect isn't forged through fear, Marcus said sharply. It's built on understanding, guidance, and yes, compassion. He sighed, inhaling the hush that followed. Look at them, Tony. They're not speaking up to tear you down, they're speaking up because they've been suffering in silence. And that's something I cannot allow in my company. The mention of my company was a dagger to Tony's composure, a reminder of the absolute power Marcus wielded. If Tony had any illusions about negotiating for a lesser punishment, they were rapidly slipping away. He wiped sweat from his brow, trying to speak but failing as his tongue felt stuck to the roof of his mouth. Marcus let the revelations hang in the air for a moment longer. Emily glanced at him, silently conveying that they had enough evidence to make a decision. But Marcus wasn't finished. He looked at the staff once more. I'd like to hear if there's anyone who has anything else to say, he said, his voice measured but open. Now is the time. There will be no retaliation. I guarantee it. A few more employees shifted, eyes flicking from each other to Tony. A man from IT cleared his throat. He made comments about my accent a few weeks ago, he said quietly. Told me if I couldn't speak perfect English, I didn't belong here. I've been with the company for 3 years. A woman with a notepad clutched to her chest added. He called me a liability when I was pregnant, said if I couldn't keep up, I should resign. Tony's eyes darted around in panic. He started to protest, but each accusation felt like a fresh wave washing over him. The truth was out, and there was no stuffing it back in. Marcus turned to him. It seems there's a pattern, Tony, he said, letting the slightest edge creep into his tone. And it's a pattern that has no place in a respectful, inclusive company. Tony tried one last desperate strategy, self-defense. I did my job. I got results. My department's numbers are good, our efficiency is up and… Marcus lifted a hand to cut him off. At what cost? He demanded. Look around you. Your employees are afraid or resentful. That might bring short-term results, but it destroys loyalty and morale. You could be the best numbers guy in the world, but if you crush the people under you, you're destroying the very foundation of this business. Again, silence descended. Marcus could almost feel the tension pulsing in the air. Employees looked at him with a mix of awe and gratitude. They'd never seen the company's owner in person before, let alone taking a stand like this. Tony, for his part, seemed on the verge of collapse. His earlier confidence evaporated like steam. So, Marcus continued, letting the moment stretch. There's only one question left, Tony. What do you have to say for yourself now? Tony opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His shoulders sagged. He knew any excuse he offered would only further condemn him. A single tear of shame collected in the corner of his eye, though he tried to blink it away. It was, in every sense, too little, too late. Emily watched this display with a sense of grim satisfaction. She felt no pity for Tony. She'd seen how a culture of bullying could ruin employees' lives, hamper productivity, and tarnish the name of an otherwise good corporation. She was glad Marcus had come in person to witness this. If he hadn't, Tony might have continued his reign of tyranny indefinitely, hurting countless people's careers and personal well-being. Marcus lowered his voice. "Tony, I want you to stay right there," he said. "I'm not finished. But first, I think it's time I address everyone here." He pivoted slightly, addressing the gathering of employees. He could sense the collective anticipation, as if they were on the edge of their seats, waiting to see what kind of resolution would emerge from this. Without skipping a beat, Marcus continued. "Some of you may know me by name, some of you may only recognize my face from the company newsletter. I founded Caldwell Corp with a vision that we'd be a place of innovation and respect, where everyone's contributions are valued. Clearly, there's a disconnect between that vision and what's been happening here." A ripple of agreement traveled through the crowd. Marcus could feel the pent-up frustrations, the relief that, finally, someone at the top was listening. He let them absorb his words before moving on to the next step, which he knew would be decisive, final, and absolutely necessary. Tony stared at the floor, feeling the seconds pass like hours. The hush that enveloped the lobby was so profound that the faint hum of the air conditioning sounded like a roar in his ears. Every pair of eyes was on Marcus and, by extension, on Tony's downfall. In this tableau of corporate reckoning, Tony understood he was moments away from losing everything he had in this company. No one spoke to defend him, not even the security guards who had taken their cues from him earlier. Marcus took a slow breath and spoke with an authoritative quiet. "This isn't the first time I've encountered attitudes like yours, Tony," he began, addressing the manager without meeting his eyes. "But it might be the most blatant. I give you credit for being exceptionally brazen." Those final words were laced with irony. Tony winced. Marcus paused, letting the tension escalate. When he finally continued, his voice carried an unequivocal judgment. "You're done here, Tony. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your position. Clean out your desk and leave this building." He turned his head toward the security guards. "Please escort him after he's gathered his belongings, but do so with professionalism. We are not animals here." A chorus of hushed gasps echoed through the lobby. Even though everyone had been expecting Tony's termination, hearing it spoken aloud sent a jolt through the room. Emily let out a small exhale of satisfaction. Some employees couldn't hold back the slight smiles tugging at their lips. The manager who had tormented them was finally stripped of his power. Tony's eyes flickered with panic. He took a stumbling step forward, arms outstretched in a gesture that combined pleading and confusion. "Mr. Caldwell, please. I need this job. My family, I can't just..." Marcus's voice remained steady. "You should have considered that before demeaning the people in your care. Actions have consequences. And don't try to make me the villain here. You chose this path with your behavior." Tears pricked at the corners of Tony's eyes as he realized there was no reprieve coming. He spun toward the crowd of employees, searching for any ally, but found only people he had bullied or belittled. Their faces were etched with either relief or indifference. There was no sympathy for him here. The security guard named Ben stepped forward. "Sir," he said to Tony in a calm but firm tone, "we can head up to your office so you can gather your things." He gestured courteously, though the implication was clear. Tony was to leave, and this was non-negotiable. Tony tried one last angle. "Mr. Caldwell, please," he begged. "I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly, I'll take classes on sensitivity, I'll personally escort you wherever you need to go." The desperation in his voice was palpable, but Marcus only shook his head. "It's too late for that," he replied, his tone final. "You've shown me who you are, Tony. And more importantly, you've shown everyone else here. This organization has no room for a manager who disrespects the very people who make our business successful." Tony slumped like a deflated balloon. He gave a small nod, tears threatening to spill down his cheeks, and turned to follow Ben toward the elevator. The lobby parted like the Red Sea, employees stepping aside to let Tony pass. It was a walk of shame, each step echoing with the finality of his downfall. A few of them watched him go with folded arms, some with grim satisfaction, others with silent empathy for the heartbreak of unemployment, but no one rushed to stop him. With Tony gone, a heavy hush remained, as if everyone was waiting for Marcus's next words. Emily stood by his side, her eyes flicking around the lobby, noticing the wave of emotions crossing each face: relief, vindication, even a touch of hope. Marcus pivoted slightly, facing the employees again. He tapped his cane once on the marble floor, drawing their attention. "Now," he said, clearing his throat, "I apologize for the commotion. But sometimes, a public situation like this is necessary to show that we don't tolerate mistreatment, whether it's directed at a visitor, an employee, or anyone else. Tony was in a position of authority, and he abused that. Not just today, but repeatedly, from what I've heard." He paused, letting his words sink in. A quiet voice piped up from the back. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell." Others nodded, murmuring their agreement. Marcus heard the gratitude in their whispers. It was a stark contrast to the frosty silence that had enveloped them when Tony was there. Marcus lifted a hand slightly, gesturing for calm. "This is your workplace," he said. "It should be a place where you feel respected, motivated, and proud to come every day. If it's not that, then I need to know. I'm asking you now, openly, if there are more issues like Tony, if there are managers or team leads who behave in a similar fashion, tell me. Tell HR, tell corporate. We can't fix problems we don't know about." He sensed a subtle shift as employees exchanged glances. Some were probably thinking of other potential problems. But the immediate fear of speaking up was lessened by what they had just witnessed, the owner himself standing up against misconduct. "Consider this an open invitation," Marcus continued. "My office door is always open, metaphorically, of course, given my condition." There was a small, nervous laugh from the crowd at his self-deprecating reference to his blindness. He allowed a slight smile to show he took no offense. "Speak up," he went on. "Don't let anyone trample your dignity or your rights in this company. I built this place from the ground up, and I'll be damned if I let it become a playground for bullies." People nodded, murmuring in agreement. A sense of relief began to wash through them. Emily scanned the crowd, her posture finally relaxing. She knew that was Marcus's style, firm yet fair, and always ready to listen. He tapped his cane gently, a gesture that drew focus. "Now I know I came here unannounced, and for that I apologize. It may have caused confusion, especially for those who didn't recognize me. But let me also say, it allowed me to see the real dynamics at play. And that's valuable information I don't get when everyone knows I'm coming." He shifted slightly, taking in the room with a thoughtful expression. "We want to build an environment that fosters collaboration, not fear. Going forward, you'll see more direct involvement from higher management. And I don't mean micromanagement. I mean we'll be here to support you, to hear your concerns, and to ensure a healthy workplace." A round of tentative applause broke out, a gentle patter that quickly grew in volume. Several employees clapped, some cheered quietly, and Marcus acknowledged their support with a modest nod. He didn't come here for applause, but it was reassuring to see that not everyone had been beaten down by Tony's regime. He turned his head slightly as he addressed the entire group. "For now, I believe you all have jobs to do. Please get back to work with the understanding that things are changing for the better. The intimidation and cruelty you may have endured are not the standard we accept." He paused. "And if any of you need to speak with me personally, I'll make time. Emily will coordinate." He gestured toward his assistant. Emily stepped forward, calm and professional. "I'll be setting up appointments, and if any of you prefer anonymity, feel free to contact HR through the internal reporting channels. We're here to listen, not to punish anyone who tells the truth." There was a collective exhalation of relief, as if a storm had passed, leaving behind a clearer sky. One by one, employees began to trickle back to their desks or the elevators, though many lingered, exchanging murmurs about what had just happened, shaking their heads in disbelief that the owner himself had stepped in to handle the situation so directly. Marcus could sense the shift in energy. The tension that had weighed the room down had lifted, replaced by cautious optimism. He felt Emily's hand lightly on his elbow, guiding him toward the main hallway. But before they moved, a young man's voice called out, "Mr. Caldwell!" Marcus paused, turning back. Leo was an intern, barely a few months into his tenure. His voice trembled as he spoke up in front of the small crowd that still lingered. "I just wanted to say," he began. "Thank you for doing that, for standing up for us. Tony was making a lot of people miserable here, and we felt like we couldn't speak up because, well, we really need these jobs." His cheeks reddened, his eyes darting nervously among his colleagues. Marcus offered a gentle nod. "I understand," he said. "And I'm sorry you felt you couldn't come forward sooner. That's something we need to fix, not just firing the problem, but changing the culture that allowed him to thrive. Interns should feel empowered to share concerns, not muzzled by fear." Leo smiled, relief brightening his features. "Yes, sir. I think it means a lot to see that even if you're the owner, you're still willing to be on the ground, seeing what's going on." He hesitated before adding, "Your being blind doesn't change the fact that you clearly see the big picture better than Tony ever did." A flicker of warmth touched Marcus's expression. "Thank you, Leo," he replied. "I hope you'll continue to speak up. One voice can make a difference." The crowd gradually dispersed, leaving Marcus and Emily standing in the center of the lobby. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of possibility. With Tony headed upstairs to pack his things, the immediate confrontation was over, but the aftermath and the cleanup were just beginning. Emily lowered her voice to a near whisper. "Should we head up to the executive floor? Your official meeting with the local director is in 15 minutes. Marcus inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Yes," he said, tapping his cane lightly. "Let's see what's next on the agenda." He paused, considering the swirl of emotions inside him. Anger at Tony, relief at having rooted out a problem, but also sadness that such a situation had existed in the first place. "Lead the way," he told Emily. They walked slowly through the lobby, staff parting respectfully to let them pass. Some employees offered murmured, "Thank you," or timid nods of appreciation. Marcus responded with polite nods, though he couldn't lock eyes with them in the traditional sense. Still, he felt their gratitude in every hushed greeting. Reaching the elevator, Emily pressed the call button. A quiet ping announced the arrival of a sleek, mirrored elevator car. Once inside, they were joined by a few employees who rode in silent admiration. No one dared speak unless Marcus initiated. He could sense their awe. They probably never expected to share an elevator with the CEO, especially not under these circumstances. When the doors slid open on one of the higher floors, Marcus and Emily stepped out. They were greeted by a wide corridor lined with offices and conference rooms. A large window at the end showcased the city skyline. Emily led Marcus toward a sizable conference room on the right, where a group of suits was waiting. They stood as Marcus entered, clearly aware by now that the owner was in the building. The local director, a gray-haired man named Roland, approached them. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, trying to sound calm, though the tension in his voice was obvious. I heard about what happened downstairs." Marcus raised a brow. "I'd like to discuss that first," he said, "before we dive into any quarterly reports." Roland swallowed hard, nodding. "Of course. Please have a seat." He gestured to the head of the conference table. Marcus felt his way around the table with Emily's subtle guidance, then settled into a chair. Emily took the seat to his right. The other directors and managers in the room looked tense. They were well aware that the fiasco in the lobby was a major black mark on their leadership, and they had to answer for how a manager like Tony had been allowed to operate unchecked. As soon as everyone was seated, Marcus cleared his throat. "I'll be frank," he began, leaning forward slightly. "What happened downstairs is unacceptable. I'd like a full explanation of how Tony ended up in that position, what performance reviews he passed, and how his behavior went unchecked." He tapped the table lightly with his fingertips, emphasizing each point. Roland coughed nervously. We have protocols, Mr. Caldwell, but clearly, Tony slipped through the cracks. He had good numbers, so I suppose we turned a blind eye, pardon the phrase, turned away from his interpersonal issues. He flushed at his poor wording, but Marcus did not react to the slip. Instead, he waited patiently for a more coherent explanation. One of the HR representatives, a woman named Lisa, spoke up, her tone contrite. We had complaints, but Tony was adept at dismissing them. He blamed the employees for poor performance or misunderstanding. And since his department was showing growth, upper management was reluctant to challenge him too hard. I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell, but that's the truth. Marcus nodded slowly. Honesty is what I need. Thank you. Now, how do we ensure this never happens again? They launched into a discussion about revised protocols, mandatory leadership training, stricter consequences for bullying behaviors, and more accessible reporting channels. Marcus listened carefully, occasionally asking pointed questions about accountability. His posture was calm, but the tone of his voice signaled a deep seriousness. He was not here for lip service, he wanted systemic changes. Every so often, Emily would interject with clarifications or share examples of best practices from other branches. She didn't mince words about the failings she'd witnessed. The directors jotted down notes, nodding in grave agreement. It was clear that, going forward, they couldn't allow a Tony to slip through the ranks again, not without immediate corrective action. Time passed in a flurry of policy outlines and personal testimony. By the end of the meeting, the local leadership team looked drained yet determined. Marcus concluded with a simple, powerful statement. If you respect your employees, they'll move mountains for you. If you bully them, they'll tear your house down. Let's make sure everyone in this company is building, not tearing down. He rose from his seat, cane in hand. Emily collected some documents, and they prepared to leave the room. The entire group stood in deference. Roland opened the door with a slightly shaky hand, and Marcus walked out, feeling the collective exhale of relief behind him. But his day wasn't over. He needed to speak with more employees, to reassure them the changes would be real, not just a show. When Marcus and Emily returned to the lobby an hour later, the atmosphere felt different. The employees who were once tense and fearful now stood a bit taller, as if the air itself had cleared. Marcus could sense it in their greetings, in the way people smiled politely, in the absence of that oppressive tension Tony had created. Word traveled fast. Tony was on his way out, packing up his desk under security's watchful eye. Marcus paused near the reception desk, remembering how Tony had berated him for simply existing in this space. The receptionist, Hannah, approached him again, looking both nervous and hopeful. Mr. Caldwell, I just wanted to say, I appreciate you standing up for us, she said softly. I never thought I'd see something like that happen. Usually, people like Tony just get away with it. He turned his face in her direction, smiling faintly. That's why it's important for you all to speak up. I'm not a mind reader. I rely on honest feedback from every corner of the company. If something's wrong, let me know. Let management know. Don't let it fester. She nodded, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. Yes, sir. Thank you. She returned to her station, looking more determined than before. Emily guided Marcus toward an office near the far end of the lobby. It belonged to a mid-level manager who oversaw client relations. He'd requested a quick word with Marcus, presumably to reassure him of their commitment to better practices. They were about to step inside when Marcus's cane touched something soft on the floor, a duffel bag. Before either of them could say anything, Tony emerged from the office next door, dragging boxes and files in disarray. A security guard followed closely, his arms crossed over his chest. Tony looked disheveled, his tie loosened, sweat dampening his brow. He froze at the sight of Marcus, as if confronted by a ghost. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. Tony lowered his gaze, shame radiating off him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everything that could have been said had already been said in that lobby confrontation. Still, Marcus felt it was important to acknowledge him, if only to drive the lesson home. Leaving so soon? Marcus asked, his voice devoid of malice, though it was firm. Tony swallowed, his throat working as he forced out a single, broken sentence. "I'm sorry," he managed, eyes glistening. "I truly am." Marcus listened, tapping his cane lightly on the floor. He believed people could change, but not everyone was willing to. He had no illusions that Tony would transform overnight. Still, he nodded politely. "I hope you learn from this," he said. "Wherever you end up next, remember this day." Tony mustered a nod, tears threatening to spill. The security guard gently guided him away, and Marcus listened to their receding footsteps. An odd hush lingered, as if the building itself was exhaling the last breath of Tony's toxic presence. Emily led Marcus into the manager's office. It was a modest space, neat and orderly, with shelves of binders and a small potted plant near the window. The manager, a woman named Cynthia, stood behind her desk, looking slightly apprehensive. "Mr. Caldwell," she greeted, gesturing to a chair. "Thank you for meeting with me." Marcus sat down, cane resting against the chair's arm. Emily stood to the side, ready to assist if needed. "What can I do for you, Cynthia?" Marcus asked, his tone professional yet open. She clasped her hands, carefully choosing her words. "I just wanted to reassure you that most of us here try our best to maintain a positive environment. Tony was an anomaly, but we didn't feel empowered to challenge him. Corporate was far away, and local HR seemed unwilling or unable to act decisively." She looked genuinely regretful, as if she felt personally responsible for not stopping Tony. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I understand the feeling of powerlessness, Cynthia. But I want to emphasize, you're not powerless. None of you are. The chain of command is there for a reason, but it doesn't exist to stifle concerns or to create tyrants. I need managers like you to speak up when they see wrongdoing." She nodded, relief evident on her face. "Yes, sir. I'll do better. And I'll encourage my team to be more vocal." He could hear the sincerity in her voice. "Good," he said simply. "Now, do you have any other concerns or suggestions? I'm here to listen." She paused, then offered a small suggestion about employee engagement events and better communication channels. Marcus listened attentively, making mental notes to discuss these ideas with the broader corporate team. Emily jotted everything down on her Braille note device. When they finished, Cynthia walked them out. The hallway was buzzing with a new energy, employees shooting glances of curiosity, but also of hope. Word had gotten around that changes were coming. This was not just a random firing, it was a deeper shift toward accountability. Marcus could sense it in the air, a subtle shift but an important one. They passed by a small break room, where a group of employees was huddled, whispering about the day's events. Upon seeing Marcus, they straightened up, some nodding politely. Emily guided him into the elevator once more, and as the doors slid shut, Marcus let out a small sigh. "You all right?" Emily asked gently. He gave a curt nod. "Just thinking about how much damage can be done by one person in power," he murmured. "And how easily it can go unchecked if no one feels safe to speak up." Emily understood. "You did what you had to do, and you did it publicly so that everyone could see there's zero tolerance for that kind of behavior." Marcus smiled faintly in her direction. "Sometimes, that's the only way to make it clear." That evening, Marcus convened one final meeting in a conference room with a handful of remaining managers, HR representatives, and a couple of employee representatives. They discussed, in detail, the new measures that would be put in place. More thorough background checks for managers, mandatory leadership and diversity training, anonymous feedback channels that would be monitored directly by higher-level executives. These ideas were not new, but they needed renewed emphasis. Marcus let them debate the specifics, occasionally chiming in with a guiding question or two. He wanted them to own the process, to feel invested in the solution so it wouldn't just be a top-down mandate. After nearly an hour of discussion, they'd hammered out a preliminary plan. He could feel the sense of purpose in the room. People were determined not to repeat the mistakes that allowed Tony to thrive. A manager from marketing raised his hand, hesitating before speaking. "I just want to say, Mr. Caldwell, that your visit today was a real eye-opener for a lot of us. It's not often you see the head of a company walk around without an entourage, experiencing the day-to-day. You've shown us that leadership is about more than just profit margins. Marcus inclined his head. I appreciate that. Just remember, leadership is everyone's responsibility. Don't wait for me to come down unannounced. If you see a problem, address it. If it's beyond your authority, escalate it. Transparency is key. The group nodded in agreement. There was a sense of collective resolve in their faces. Emily wrapped up by confirming deadlines for their next steps, dates by which certain training would be completed, protocols implemented, and feedback loops established. It was a roadmap for cultural change, and while it wouldn't happen overnight, it was a start. By the time Marcus left the building, escorted by Emily, dusk was settling over the city. The once chaotic lobby was now calm, with only a few employees working late. A security guard, one who had been present earlier, nodded respectfully as Marcus passed, clearly relieved that he didn't have to forcibly remove the boss. Outside, the hum of traffic and the glow of street lights greeted them. Emily guided Marcus toward a black company car waiting by the curb. As she opened the door for him, she couldn't help but smile, an expression of both pride and relief. I think today made a difference, she said quietly. Marcus settled into the back seat, nodding. Let's hope so, he replied. If nothing else, Tony won't be able to bully anyone under this roof again. Emily slid in beside him, and the driver pulled away from the curb. Marcus leaned back against the seat, a weariness settling in. The day had been emotionally charged, from the moment Tony barked at him in the lobby to the final meeting that laid the foundation for a healthier work environment. Yet despite the fatigue, he felt a certain sense of satisfaction. As the car merged onto the main road, Marcus tapped his cane lightly against the floor, thinking of the employees who had finally found their voice today. He thought of Leo, the intern who had timidly thanked him. He thought of the people from accounting, IT, and HR who had spoken out against Tony's abuse. And he thought of Tony himself, scurrying away with cardboard boxes, a casualty of his own arrogance. Yes, Marcus owned the company. But more importantly, he felt responsible for the people in it. Being blind had never stopped him from seeing what mattered most: respect, dignity, and fairness. He closed his eyes, letting the sounds of traffic wash over him. Today was a victory, but tomorrow there would be more challenges. That was the nature of leadership, after all, an ongoing commitment to doing what's right. He felt Emily's hand gently rest on his arm. She didn't say anything, but he understood the gesture. It was an acknowledgement of a hard-fought battle, a reminder that they weren't done yet, and a silent promise that she'd be there to help him see, in every sense of the word, whatever came next. And as the city lights streaked past the car windows, Marcus Caldwell allowed himself a small, grateful smile. In a single day, a toxic manager had been removed, employees had regained hope, and the corporate culture had taken a decisive step forward. All because one man refused to bow to prejudice, and refused to let anyone else be bullied into submission.